just quivering with excitement for spring. The plum tree outside of Ejo's office, maybe 10% of the blossoms open today. Really spectacular. I looked at it very carefully yesterday. There was nothing. And now, if you look at it from here, it's just looks like it's all out, but just about 10% of the blossoms. Yeah. And at least this cherry tree over here, none so far that I can see, but I think tomorrow's going to be the day, so exciting. I think everyone's aware that the mask policy has changed. It's so nice to see so many faces, and of course, the masking is optional. So as you feel called to wear a mask, to not wear a mask, I think that'll maybe forever be a part of our culture now, wearing masks. It's really interesting thinking going forward. So of course, be kind and aware that everyone's having a different transition there. So, last class. I think we'll go ahead and dive in, and I'll talk for the first part of class, and hopefully it could kick up some significant and worthwhile dirt, and we could talk about that for a while. And that's the plan. So last class, we spent much of the time talking about path. And of course, a couple of classes before, we spent time on the Eightfold Path and lots of time on the six perfections, the paramitas, and how those within those six perfections or practices have a dynamic relationship at certain places between each other, and also within the fullness of all six of those, there's kind of a deepening or a subtle, more subtlety-making effect that happens particularly through concentration and wisdom. And then I also introduced another way to think about path, and that's the gradual training arc. So those 6 points are generosity, and then after that, ethical living, heavenly realms and heavenly dwelling, drawbacks of sensual pleasures, then renunciation, and the Four Noble Truths. So again there, generosity being the place where you first shake up your clinging to the phenomenal self that you seem to inhabit and be moment by moment. Give it away. Give something away. Shake that up. And then to further that tenet of generosity and interconnection and mutual interbeing, live ethically. So live in accord with the complexity that self and other are equal and connected. And once we start doing that, things in our life start to go better in many ways. And you can experience quite a bit of bliss and pleasure and warm community. I think I mentioned something, what's it like to live in a neighborhood where you can go knock on your neighbor's door and ask for an egg or a cup of sugar, right? Or there's a neighborhood birthday party and, you're walking down the street and they're like, oh, come in for a bit. Here, have some food, share this with us. So there's all sorts of ways we could think about that warm, beautiful community, and that we want that. We want to be cultivating that in our world. And once we start to develop some acumen or some faculty with creating those heavenly realms, or whether those are kind of internal states or external community situations, we can see that that isn't quite enough. At least, maybe you will find that it's not enough. I have found that it's not enough. And there's still this kind of itch of anxiety. So for example, what's it like when I don't feel good? Do I just sort of get neurotic or depressed, like something in my being crashes? Or if I don't have anything nice to give, or if I don't have an insight to offer in a conversation, do I feel anxious about that? And so there's a way we are sometimes always striving to rely on those good qualities, those good states. And so is there a next step that's offered? So this and that gradual training is one of those movements, is that you go to the heavenly realms, you figure out how wonderful they are, and then you're like, oh, but even those fall apart. I can't seem to maintain those in their perfect, pleasurable quality. And so you realize the drawbacks of those states, those circumstances, and you give rise to the willingness to explore renunciation. That's a big kind of scary word, But fundamentally, it means not relying on phenomenal circumstances. So not relying on just the good things, but actually there has to be something more fundamental that happens. And when you explore that and give rise to the possibility of entering the world through renunciation that's not relying on external or internal states, then the Buddha will teach you the Four Noble Truths. Or you will start to naturally, I would say, converse with a Buddha who will offer you insight into the Four Noble Truths, kind of a mythical lens there. Or you'll find communities which will talk about it explicitly, perhaps like this one. And that brought us to nirvana, and we spent some time there. And I offered an image that Thich Nhat Hanh laid out in his book, The Other Shore. And I'll read a small section of that for you. The word nirvana means extinction. Nirvana is not a place you can go. Nirvana is not in the future. Nirvana is the nature of reality as it is. Nirvana is available in the here and the now. You are already in nirvana. Imagine a wave rising on the surface of the ocean. The wave is made of water, but sometimes it forgets. A wave has a beginning and an end. It goes up and it goes down. It can be higher or lower than other waves, and more or less beautiful than other waves. If the wave is caught by these notions, beginning, ending, coming up, going down, more or less beautiful, it will suffer. But if the wave realizes it is water, it enjoys going up and going down. It enjoys being this wave, and it sees that at the same time it is all other waves. There is no discrimination, no fear at all. The wave doesn't have to go anywhere to look for water in the present moment. The wave is already water. Nirvana is not the object of our searching, and we do not need to enter nirvana because everything is in nirvana already. Our reality is the reality of no birth and no death. Our reality is the reality of no going and no coming. We are perfectly in nirvana. We have been nirvanized from the beginning. I messed it up again. We are perfectly in nirvana. We have been nirvanized from the non-beginning, the without beginningness of things. So to accompany that discussion, I made a fun little diagram here. This isn't a diagram, this is a picture. To talk about that metaphor further. So when we're talking about these different states of living beings, we have beings who are living primarily through greed, hate, and delusion, which we could think of as just being caught by the phenomenal state of things. So I actually expanded this a little bit for my last iteration, and I put a very happy smiley face, a big sad frowny face, and kind of a blurred out face. So I think these are ways we could talk about the different kind of ways we could look at delusion. And so I want this to keep going, I've got the thing, let's keep it where it is and turn that wheel, right? There's hateful, this sucks, I hate this, get it away, tell me what I have to do. And then another way equally present in this is waves are challenging and sharp, and I'm going to just kind of disconnect. I'm going to be away from it all. I am just going to pretend I can't see anything. And I don't think the experience will feel like that. Or when I have it, that it doesn't feel like you're pretending, but there's a kind of decision that's being made there not to feel the sharpness of things. And equally, sort of on the other side of that, I would point to a kind of depressive quality. So there can be a way with our being, we try and smush all the waves. We try and just lay heavily upon them and not acknowledge the constant changing of phenomena, right? So I think without too much thinking about that, we can feel how those movements are almost always in us to one level or another. So in thinking about a being when they start to move with and realize good karma, and again, all these can be happening all together at the same time, that there starts to be this kind of connection between all the different waves of our experience. And a place like generosity, we can realize that when we give something away, it really doesn't become ours, but somehow we get something back at the same time. I think they did a study that they gave people, I think $10 or $15, and they said, go spend this on yourself. And they gave people a survey, how happy do you feel? People said, I'm pretty good, it was a good coffee, whatever. And then they gave people that same amount of money and they said, give it to someone. And then they had them take the survey, and people were happier when they gave the money away. Across the board, it was something they could measure, right? Isn't that great? So exciting. So there's this way with good karma, you're starting to feel some faculty of the shared being. And yet, there's almost always a tendency to pitch towards an experience or a feeling or an end result that you're looking for. So for example, when I was, I got about a little bit wound tight while making the presentation for this class. Being like, oh yeah, this will do this, and this will do this, and everyone will realize emptiness through this example. Isn't that great? And I'm sort of like wound tight, and then it's like, whoa. Where's the bodhisattva with a foot in deep trust in all phenomena? Where's the trust that the barking dog, the blooming flowers, the breath coming in and out, it's all equally teaching that actually the Buddha, the wateriness of all beings is actually always present, right? That actually there's something that cannot be affected by teaching about it or pointing to it. And so hence all of the sort of mysterious teachings we encounter about what could it mean to realize the deep reality of our being that is always pointed to through these spiritual pursuits. So we looked at the verses of Faith Mind, and I read a couple of quotes out from that. We chant that here in the mornings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And one of the quotes that really stuck out for me was, there's no need to seek the real, just extinguish your views. So almost always we'll be up on a wave, we'll be looking out, what next? What else should I do? What's the next shape I need to do? Tell me the shape of water. I'll do it. I will discern what that is, right? But no need to seek the real. Just extinguish your views. So really great pointing towards what we're up to, I think, in meditation practice, right? This attentive non-intention is one way that the quality of heart in Zazen meditation is talked about. Attentive non-intention, which really looks like being pressed up mostly against that being that's always looking for something in many ways. The universally recommended instructions for Zazen by Dogen Zenji, the founder of this school of Zen, he said, to take the backward step that turns the light and shines it backwards or inwards, and that body and mind of themselves will drop away and your original face will manifest. If you want to realize such, get to work on such immediately. So very precise pointing right there. It's encouraging us to encounter our being on a different order. So Ejo was fond of teaching about, he spoke disparagingly of headlamps this past Sunday, for those who heard the Dharma talk, right? Everywhere you look, there's a light, there's a plan, there's a realm. You're one of the 6 beings if you're just the 6 realms of being, if you're navigating by the headlamp. Always, there's a plan, there's a shape, you know what to do. But what happens when, is there something, can you turn that light to shine it backwards? And there's a kind of maybe blinding that happens. Or there's a darkness, maybe hard to say what it is. And when you do that, your body and mind will drop away and your original face will manifest. All right. Original face. And so with this kind of talk, and I think with this metaphor of water here and the shape and it's totally present, but actually there's something you kind of have to do to realize it. This dynamic is everywhere in Zen, Zen poetry, Zen discussion, and I would say probably Buddhism at large, though I'm mostly comfortable in this tradition. So it's the great spiritual mountain of Buddhism. So there's, and actually it's the altar right here, that this altar is said to be Mount Sumeru, the mountain of the universe, which the Buddha is upon. And various living beings interact on that mountain in different places. And we put it at the center when we're chanting sutras. So it's the ocean of awakening. Many people have heard the quote about the whole earth as a single mass of fire from the ancestor Genjo, right? And I think for me that comes particularly alive when I imagine this ocean as now being 3 and 4 dimensional, kind of going in all different directions. And my experience moment by moment is innumerable waves coming and meeting right here. That's kind of burning and blazing that I just experience as self. Another sutra we chant in the morning says that the womb of wisdom, or the seed of wisdom, is like an ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. An ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. So, this imagery, it's all playing in the same realm, trying to point us to another order of being that we can explore. So, this class has mostly been quite textbooky. There's been theories and maps and diagrams going on, how this relates to that. And now we've been sort of shifting gears and entering a poetic imagery of kind of imagining the fantastic storehouse of awakening that sages have been realizing and pointing other people to for a long, long time. To close class tonight, I would like to talk about maybe more of how we might realize that if we are actually undertaking that path, kind of pointing towards practicality and how that will appear in our life. I have another quote from that piece on gradual training that I sent out in the last email. So this is Buddha talking to his monks. It says, "There's the case where, when conviction has arisen, one visits a teacher. Having visited, one grows close. Having grown close, one lends ear. Having lent ear, one hears the Dharma. Having heard the Dharma, one remembers it. Remembering, one penetrates the meanings of the teachings. Penetrating the meaning, one comes to an agreement through pondering the teachings. There being an agreement through pondering the teachings, desire arises. When desire has arisen, one is willing. When one is willing, one contemplates. Having contemplated, one makes an exertion. Having made an exertion, one realizes with the body the ultimate truth, and having penetrated it with discernment, sees it." So that's a long chain that I'm not expecting you to remember. But one point there is that you will not just get this. So there are some famous schools where, Edja was talking this past Sunday about the bottom falling out of the bucket and bam, right? It's all clear. That's actually after, right, many, many years of this pondering, this contemplating, this being with a teacher, endlessly working. So while the Zen school, I think, is very right to hold up these moments of saying you can fall through deeply. And I feel lucky enough to say I've experienced something close to that at times. Also, it will be a slog. It'll be something that unfolds through time. And it's also said in here, what is this growing close with a teacher? And so I just want to encourage all of you that if these teachings and this community, turns your lights on in some way, Or maybe we could say if it turns your life, your lights off in a way that's kind of wondrous and exciting to you, please don't be afraid. Well, I don't want to say that. Be willing to step in and become close. And that, in a way, puts the community on the test to say, are they worthy of your energy? Are they worthy of you putting yourself forward like that? And are they rising to meet you? And so please bug teachers here. So Ejo has basically open teacher time where you can go meet with him. Other people who have been practicing for a long time have practice discussions. So find things that fascinate you or is someone who intrigues you and go bug them. That's something that is difficult to do, but it's tremendously rewarding, I would say. So please impose yourself, ask endless questions, and study these kinds of things and bring your whole messy self forward. So I've, of course, recognized this might just kind of be a one-off class for you. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. But if this is starting to feel like a path you want to investigate further, please, I just encourage you to mix yourself in fully. Also heard a very dirty word in there, desire, right? Kind of striking, right? And towards the end, right? It's not even at the beginning. Towards the end, through pondering the teachings, desire arises. Pondering the teachings, desire arises. I think so often, we will hear our idea of the teachings is that we will ponder them and our desire will wilt, right? Our desire will wilt. But I think it's exactly the opposite, that our desire will be stoked in a new way, and that desire is so essential for finding the quality of this water. And you will make the mistake of beating up your desire. You will make that mistake. And so please be kind to yourself. And it's good to remember there's a story about the Buddha's awakening, that after beating himself up and practicing ascetics for a long time, said he only ate like a couple grains of rice a day and was so weak he was just about to die. A few things happened to him and he regained some nourishment and was like, this is not the way. And as he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he had a memory of sitting under a rose apple tree as he was a child. And I think he was looking out at his father's serfs in his kingdom doing work on the fields, which is kind of funny. It's such a high-born, noble thing to do. I'm like, I feel so at ease. But in that moment under the tree, he had a moment of peace. And the turning point is that peace was not dependent on sensuality. So I think, of course, his body was there, his presence was there. He probably felt fairly nice. But he had a sense of ease that was not connected to any sense of positionality, any sense of having attained something. There was just an overarching sense of contentment that he felt as a child. And that was said to be the gate of him realizing perfect awakening later in his life. And it was a kind of, the word was, it was deeply pleasurable. There was a soft, enduring pleasure that he encountered that was his gateway to final awakening. And I think coming from a fairly purity-oriented culture, through Protestantism, we inevitably have very strong hang-ups and challenges around that word pleasure. I don't need to elaborate on that. But how can we find this new order of pleasure? And I think having questioning around that and looking for it is really important to exploring the path. And I would say further that if the path is really working, if it's going good, that your desire will not be gone. And I'm using like the lower D bad desire, the greed, hate, and delusion, these things that we commonly will call your desires, your craving. Your craving will not disappear, but rather it will be transformed, right? It's not going to die. It'll transform. Your greed will become compassion. Your hate will become discernment. And your ignorance and delusion will become your wisdom. Say that again. And greed, right? I want, will become, I want to help. I want to touch. I want to be connected. I want to be helpful. And hate, that thing which cuts and divides, will actually be profound knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. Become further and further discerning of what intentions really help, what movements of our being have what consequences and causes. That hate really plays an important role. And I would say it's been a really important part of my own personal practice to be asking myself, where is my hate? I think many people who lean towards spiritual practice may have subtly amputated their own anger and hate. And it's very good to go looking for it if it doesn't seem to be very present. And I find that I actually don't have to look very far to be like, well, this is bugging me. That person did that wrong. I'm really annoyed at this. But actually it's a subtle pushing away that prevents a sort of combustion for really happening that transforms that hate into something that can be helpful for beings. And that ignorance and delusion, that walking around with a headlamp, just pressing forward and trying to figure out what we are by pressing into the world, can now just step back, and become a subtle kind of knowing that doesn't require proof. A knowing and a trust that doesn't require proof. So that leads me to my next point. A couple years ago, I asked Ejo in a public question and answer, what is faith? And I'll read a few excerpts from his response. I asked him, what is faith? He said, the suffering, the dukkha, is reliable, and it's not a problem to be solved. It is an invitation, and the flow of that dukkha is our faith. What I'm saying is to stay deeply connected to that river of pain, as I've been calling it. That river of pain is a river that leads to nirvana. It is a river of nirvana, again, the water imagery. But it is only our rejection that keeps us from knowing its wisdom. How do you really not lift off of the suffering? Our zazen is an example of that. This is why Bodhidharma said to face the wall unwaveringly. You know, boom, there it is. The wall is right here. It's that river. Am I going to stay attentive? Or am I going to make the project of getting away? It's almost just that simple. And because that can be unbearable, we have to have good friends, because sometimes we can't stay there by ourselves. So as we encounter this path, we will be brought face to face with our difficulty. In a famous sutra about wisdom that we study here often, the Diamond Sutra, in chapter 16, it's oddly enough one of my favorite chapters in the whole teaching. And it says, if you're really doing the wisdom well, and you're memorizing this sutra, and you're digesting it in your being, and you're proclaiming it for all, the Buddha says, you will experience the utter contempt of myriad beings. You will experience the utter contempt of myriad beings. I'll actually read you the quote exactly. Nevertheless, Subhuti, the noble son or daughter who grasps, memorizes, recites, and masters such a sutra as this, and contemplates it thoroughly, and explains it in detail to others, will suffer their contempt, their utter contempt. And how so? Subhuti, the bad karma created by them in past lives, should result in an unfortunate rebirth. But now, By suffering such contempt, they put an end to the bad karma of their past lives and attain the enlightenment of Buddhas. Wow, isn't that surprising? You'd expect it just to be more talk of light and brilliance, right? Yeah, Molly.
So he's saying by doing all this researching and by doing all this digestion, that others are going to be angry at you for spewing all this information, and so that they're angry at you for having this, and they're like because they haven't done the work that you've done to get to that point.
So there's kind of some code words in there to say those are many of the methods you could use to study it, but it's really pointing one who knows it deeply is kind of like, and explaining it to others and grasped it means having like gotten the juice. So it's not merely that one's kind of doing the work and someone sees them doing the work, but really they're making their whole life about maintaining what is true about this sutra. Does that make sense? Kind of a subtle difference there. And that when they are teaching or offering what's true about that, they experience the contempt of living beings. So for example, I think it is very, why aren't we all just super jazzed to be sitting zazen all the time? I think this is a place where there's a lot of discomfort we encounter when we sit meditation. And that the committee in your heart and mind, for example, is pretty pissed off at you. I think, like for me, I imagine them saying, well, if you really care, like why aren't we going to get a chocolate piece of cake right now? If you really care, like why aren't you giving over to the shape I see? Why aren't you giving over to it? And even another way I experience this often is like, why am I not helping people in need more often? Like I've decided to make my life about this profession here at the temple, and I give it over here. But why am I not giving more food away? Why am I not like rallying to solve the housing crisis? And I don't have a good answer for that, but I recognize that it is still based in wanting to make a good shape. And not that I want to say that I'm doing the right thing. I really hope people are giving their whole life to those activities, and I think it's so important. But see, this is maybe a dialectic of wisdom here, in that how do the living beings in us who only know certain perspectives and powers and shapes as fulfillment, how do they react when part of us no longer chooses to navigate by those? And they're pissed off about it. How's that landing, Molly? Yeah.
It's hard to say because everybody has their own push to the end. And how do we speak about others and what their passions are when we have our own path to go down?
Could you say a bit more?
I think what's coming to mind is like when people are saying like, oh yeah, you should be doing this thing and this thing, but they have their own passions, their own desires for why they do the things they do. And if we disperse our passions too broadly, nothing will actually come into our net. It's just too wide of a net to cast. So rather than pointing the finger, I guess, or saying you could be doing more, try to focus more on what skills are within you already and focus on what those things are, what you can do, and be content with those.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that makes me think of as the ideal of the bodhisattva. For example, if you feel someone who gets totally wrapped up in their work or trying to, pointing fingers of you could be doing more, I think people who tend towards, say, helping professions, for example, can be really easy to get burnt out because you might not be having a foot in the root of being, which might be able to simmer things down, but you get caught. I mean, to be an activist and to try and be changing really challenging things in the world, we can just get wound in trying to make a perfect wave. And although it's so important, you'll get lost and crushed in how to maintain a longevity over time. And you said something about the fullness of your passion. I think balancing that in some way. Do you have anything else to say about that. Yeah. Chase?
I struggle with these sorts of questions about path all the time. And I feel like every time I'm considering diving a little deeper or, like taking some kind of next step that I've like imagined for myself, like that feels like the moment when all of the like internal chaos kind of like erupts and becomes a little like, like I try to like trust in my ability to navigate these things. And so then whenever I feel like taking the plunge, I find that oftentimes it's kind of like the volume increases, that it's like, oh, like maybe I should not do that because the intensity, like, are these those myriad beings and their contempt for deepening of the path? Or like, I guess I don't know how to kind of conceive of this.
Yeah, I would say one part would be yes. I think, one of the classic ways to image it was the Buddha left the palace of worldly power, and he was offered a great kingdom and great acumen and skill in the ways to make the world a very good shape. And part of his realization was, oh, that will not satisfy my anxiety. And so he turned that over. And so I think undoubtedly, anytime, like when I go to sit down on Zazen, you always have many reasons to not do that. It's kind of a standing joke, and I think every Zen community, that there's always a good reason not to sit. Always a good reason not to sit. And so I think when you've practiced here for quite some time, and to take up commitments that really limit your ability to respond in terms of being able to affect other things in your life, making money, who knows? But also, spending time with your dog, right? There's some really beautiful things that are central to your life too. And so I think all of us are making the decisions all the time about, one layer of it is what we call deepening path, and I don't want to use that, formal practices that deepen our hearts. And other ones is surviving in the world and doing things we need to do. And then I would say a third place is putting lots of effort into not making a division between those. And finding that actually there doesn't have to be any division in all of those. I think that is a great place where the Bodhisattva wields their true colors. And then I think also a place where desire is super important, about how is my desire for a beautiful life? How is it flowing through the way I eat chocolate cake? I'm super disparaging about that, as you all know. That's a challenge for me, right? It's often held up as the bad guy. But how is your heart different when someone hands you some homemade sweet? And they say, this is for you. I made it for you, right? It's hard to look them in the eyes and be like, right? There's something luscious and beautiful and opening that happens. And so we can live all of our desires, I think, with a foot in that water. And lastly there, I wanted to comment on, it can be unbearable to stay here by ourselves. And so it's important to have good friends. It's hard being human. It's really hard. And a quick plug for this Friday night is the ceremony of atonement and renewal of vows that we do here. It's always in correspondence with the full moon. It's an ancient choreography of becoming, taking away the gap between moments of our hearts where we failed to live up to our deepest ambitions and aspirations. And it's really so beautiful to be in a room full of other adults who are facing We have a mirror up on the altar in front of the Buddha, facing the mirror of your own intention. And there's a part at the beginning where you could state out loud anything you'd like to atone for. And almost, every person who has a spouse pretty much says, for being angry at my partner. And you're like, oh yes, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. So this is, in many ways, our practice of teacher and student that's possible in communities. It is the practice of Sangha, or the community of practitioners itself. And it's also just relying directly on the Buddhas and trying not to kill our delusion. And learning that through this faith, we can trust the river of pain. There's such an alchemy, a transformation, everything in your being, not everything, many parts of your being that you can see want to run from the pain. But I know my heart was drawn in when I just realized that I didn't want to be in a cold, dark room paying attention to anything at 5 o'clock in the morning. And yet, there's this man who, Ejo, my teacher, who was there Monday through Friday. Saturday he takes off. We all take off. Monday through Friday, there, sitting. And it sort of like haunted my gut. It's like I'd wake up in my warm bed and be like, oh, they're there sitting. So I'm not saying that has to be your path, but to know that there are beings, I would say within us and without of us, with outside and inside us, who are constantly attending. And to want to grow near them and to trust them and ask them questions, I think is a very good thing, very important thing. So I'll leave you with one last thing, and then I hope people have some leftover energy for discussion. This is a quote from one of my favorite people in the world. His name is James Hillman. He was a student of Jung's and a psychologist, a depth psychologist, and I read him very often. And something I came across was such a beautiful description of path. I return to it often, and I'd love to share it with you all. Nursing and sitting with it, dwelling upon it, tracing the invisible mystery of it, letting compassion come for your own chronic disorder. This all slows down your progress. It moves you from future thinking to essential thinking about our own nature and character, upon life's meaning and deaths, upon love and its failure, upon what is truly important, and upon the small things in words, manners, act, necessitated by the limitations of your inescapable disorder. We begin to hear differently, watch differently, absorb more sensitively. Confronted with the unbearable in my own nature, I show more trepidation, which is, after all, the first piece of compassion. In regard to others, my manners alter, my language more attuned and precise. I become more sophisticated and artful. As a cat steps, a bird perceives, a dog follows invisibles in the air. I look to arts for understanding, to ritual for enactments, and to the lives of men and women of the past and how they came through. I need something further than community and civilization, for they may be too human, too visible. I need imaginal help from tales and images, idols and altars, and the creatures of nature to help me carry what is so hard to carry personally and alone. Well, we have a ripe 20 minutes together. And I'd encourage not only questions, this would be, I think, a really special time for people to you can share things you're working with and how they relate to points in this class that you've been studying. any of the teachings that in particular have moved your experience and how you relate with this idea of path and spirituality and whatever that is. No need to be too precise. No need to have a question.
Genjo, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the class because I see myself at the top of that wave for like the last 30 years. Trying to enforce my will from a terribly dysfunctional family that was violent and sociopathic and led to 20 years on heroin and led to being incarcerated. And through all that, I tried to deny it, covered up with drugs, deny it didn't happen, and now I'm accepting all of the awful suffering and pain that is involved in all of that. And it's really opened my eyes to a whole other way of dealing with it. So I just want to say thank you. Appreciate the class.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Genjo?
Yes, Kashi.
Hi. So I just wanted to make a comment. I don't really have a question. I just want to say that I've really enjoyed this, and I know I haven't really asked any questions or anything like that, but I can feel everything that you're teaching sort of inside me, and I can feel how it moves through my life. Sometimes it's really hard for me to think of a question because some of the Buddhist language, you guys have a special way that you talk, and so it's almost like how you said in the morning, on Sunday morning, to just let the chant wash over you. It's kind of like I've been letting your words wash over me, and I feel like I'm understanding them in a different way. So, yeah, that's what I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashin. That's so wise. Something I really smile at and appreciate in our tradition is the encouragement. I forget, it's written in several places in the ancient texts, but they say just hang out with your teacher and to realize how compassionate your teacher is, because they will just be saying the same thing again and again and again and again and again. And then you'd be like, ooh, that felt a little different. You'd be like, oh, it's the same thing. right? And then I think what's so wonderful about that, in this game, it's the exact same. That I think that moment, if I imagine this moment of awakening that beings have said to have gone through, that it's something like that. That the ever-present nature of the depth of water has never left us at any point. It's never left. And really, it never started. That there's something that special that exists. Even, I just want to believe that that's true. And somehow that also unfolds through human relationships as well. And I wonder if we also can certify it by the way we love our cat. Right? You're paying attention to how much they threw up. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I better tell, I'm telling Joichi, he threw up a lot. It was looked like he was walking down the stairs. Never seen that before. So even in our misery, in our dysfunction, that there might be something watching and attending and saying the same thing again and again and again and again. Yeah. So I think, thank you so much for coming forward and saying that, the courage just to be washed and to turn and to especially loosen up the part of us that might feel like it needs something interesting to say, I think is really important. So thanks again.
I have a question.
Antonia?
It relates to transformation of greed, hate, and delusion, and I was wondering, because this is something that I find myself struggling with a lot, is the transformation of cynicism. I find myself, especially in recent years, becoming far more cynical than I've ever been, and I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts on that in terms of cynicism being transformed?
think there's a point where when we start to feel that certain energies are moving through us and we're like, something is suspicious about this. I think to really turn to it in a moment where it appears and just to ask it, what do you want? Especially cynicism is a movement of, I think, it's definitely got some flavors of avoidance in there. And so in terms of thinking of transformation, everything has to recover a sense of sincerity. And that we, I think, in our own intention and in more or less a coarse or subtle way, can shine a light on that thing that's just kind of always wanting to squirm out and be right. And to say, hey, what do you really want? And what do you think is right? And probably we'll just watch it squirm in lots of different ways. But my experience is the cynicism is actually asking for that kind of response. That it wants to know where it's useful, and it doesn't know how to be made useful. So oftentimes I think, anger is under there, a sense of desperation is under there, a sense of feeling of hopelessness or inability to affect things. And so I think as we become more sensitive and caring for it, like a mother holding a baby, it can be willing to reveal that it's actually multifaceted. And we can say, oh, actually, look, this is really helpful. I need to be angry about this. Oh, this feeling of desperation and sadness, I see you. That's hard. Right, so we can break it up into more further complexity and take care of each piece better. But it requires, I think, a real, we gotta ask it, we gotta look at it and make the time to do that. Does that feel like it offers some inroads, or do you have any follow-up thoughts?
No, it does. Thank you.
Say Aman and Bill.
We're talking about really substantial, large emotions of desperation and anger and hate. I'm wondering, hearing your words is so beautiful, and still I feel like caught in the nooks and crannies of how to have conversations with those massive waves and not just be like absolutely pummeled by them. With the image of I'm practicing, I'm playing around with turning the light off, but there's a transition period where the rest of the forest is still very dark. There are creatures in the night.
Yeah. I mean, your question points me back to a kind of dishonesty I sometimes feel. With my own life, I've had to rely on something very full and very generous with itself. People might look at me sometimes and say, what courage to take up the cloth, might be a thought. But more like it's felt out of desperation, I turned to something that would keep my body together while I was falling apart. And I think about that in monastic training, and just the brute confrontation of being tired, not being able to do anything I want, having responsibility, and superiors always basically having nothing worthwhile I could offer that felt like my own. It's like if I did the very best I could in a situation, it was someone else's idea and way to do it, and I just fulfilled the shape. And such a kind of deep sadness that came along with that, at my own want to be special and worthwhile. So, all that to say is, I don't know how to do this without relying on community. I just don't. And I think that's why there aren't many groups of people gathering and studying this kind of thing. You can see if this kind of, we're having pretty heartfelt conversations about the real shit. And this cannot be sustained by intellectual inquiry. It just cannot. The real work that needs to be done to hold this kind of suffering and beauty. It'll fragment and break off. It'll be co-opted. It'll become used. It'll become wrapped around in some kind of way. But I think there's such a genius in ancient traditions that have managed to say, please play in these realms and study and learn and write poetry. And then, regardless of how you feel, just do this every day. And a couple times during the year, do these special things, right? There's a cyclical liturgy to the whole thing. But it says, don't let the grass fire catch, because it'll want to go in 1,000 different directions. Sometimes you will have the blazing light of truth. Other times you will be mired in darkness and despair. Don't fall for either. Keep it in the center, right? Keep going around the circle. And then actually, that blazing light and the darkness, those become your tools of awakening. And you can tell someone, I know the dark and I know the light. And you can freely, that's my imagination of the Buddha, is having experienced every possible suffering and door of awakening that a living being can experience. So it's all there, totally primed. And when the question comes forward, it's offered perfectly. And so I don't know if that's, I would like to think that that's optimistic as an answer. In one way, it's like very simple, but it's also that how to rely on a sangha and to find a teacher who you might really respond with, or community, or however that can look for you. That also is a huge challenge and full of problems. But also there's real hope there, I think. Bill?
I've had a lot of resonating thoughts on generosity moving into ethical living, moving into wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the great fortune of living in a community where I can ask for an egg and I can deliver an egg.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a bit of an informal study on all of the depths and breadths of generosity and the ways that it can happen, especially with people who are not necessarily your chosen people, but just people who are near you. And it's been delightful. And I don't always, it rings true in my body. And sometimes I say those things and they're not heard and understood. And especially people in my family who I sometimes am far away from and have a different perspective on things, a perspective that I came out of, look at me and they say, you're doing too much and it seems like you're poor. And I'm like, why don't you see the wealth that I have? Look at all these goodies. Like maybe it's not money, but I have all of these goodies. I'm coming to this class, encountering other people who value and validate the same wealth that I do. It's very affirming. And it's also, I'm going back to school right now. It's really difficult, not just this school, but other school. I'm asking myself to learn, and I'm also giving something to myself, like the pursuit of knowledge. And I've been experiencing even more of the wealth than I ever expected. All of the things of like, you pay into it because you don't expect anything in return. And all of this abundance has just been coming out when I'm not looking for it or asking for it. It's just known because I have been experimenting in generosity in all of these ways in the way that I can. And it also, moving towards wisdom, I feel very peaceful at this age that wisdom is coming and it's happening actively. And I don't feel as urgent as I previously have of like, I need to know these things. I need to learn. I'm so thirsty for knowledge. It's just like, oh, cool. It's happening. And I will age and it's going to continue to happen. There's so much wealth.
Yeah. And family is indeed the true test of that wealth. That was unfair to families. When you come out of a womb that doesn't, a womb in the kind of metaphorical sense, an ethos, a family ethos that doesn't value those things. I was trying to be a subtle crusader for my family for so long. And looking back, it's so embarrassing, but so important, right? Be like, look, I got these goods. Don't you think they're good? And they're just like, we're gonna go to lunch. And like, do you want to come? And you can't pay, but like, I was like, yeah, I'll come. Like, I want to eat. But there's such a proof of, you get to prove it in a sense that you can say like, oh yeah, more money would be nice. But then my experience is with people who aren't interested in this will often appreciate it, have a subtle turning towards that wealth, and many people want to be near you at times, and at other times be very frustrated with you, and your own willingness to be vulnerable in that way and to give without receiving anything back will again engender some hate, I think. And it can be subtle, but it frustrates the program of conquering and controlling. And in fact, a classic way to think about what a mendicant does, so classic, someone who relies only on alms, is that they are living the most generous way they can. They become the perfect mirror of generosity for living beings who, if we're thinking about this, are just caught in how much do I have? How do I keep it here? But someone who wanders around at peace with an open bowl the Buddha said he only went to 7 houses before going back to his, where he was staying outside of a city. And if he didn't receive any food in those 7 houses, he wouldn't eat that day. Like what an encouragement to be like, oh, the Buddha, like, what do I have? Like, can we give it away, right? And then, just knowing enough and going back and living your life. That what a challenge that poses to living beings. And for me, the experience of Ejo practicing here every day, being a challenge for me, just in the very fact of his beingness, was such a challenge. So I think as you're saying, as you start to learn about pulling the levers of wisdom and path, this experiencing how to work with people and what comes from that, it becomes quite a beautiful and engaging study. Thank you for sharing.
Genjo?
Mm-hmm. Ray?
I have probably a naive question, but
Great.
I'll preface it by saying I came to starting to read about Zen and studying it through very selfish reasons. I wanted to meditate to help deal with some stress in my life and things I was going through, and started going to a Zen meditation group, and there was a little Dharma talk during each one, and I thought that was interesting, and I started reading more about it. And as I got into it, I liked it more like the psychology of Buddhism, or the Buddhist study of human psychology. And I understand that there are other traditions in Buddhism that don't put so much emphasis on meditation. And I'm just wondering if you can expound a little bit on why that's so central to Zen, and what you think of the other schools who may not put so much emphasis on the meditation, but more on the learning of the Buddhist teachings.
Yeah, so I think to speak from the side of Zen and putting emphasis on meditation, it's a definite dangerous hubris, I would say, that we put so much emphasis on meditation. And the way it tends to be offered here in the West is very much that it is what Zen centers get up to. Like places of Zen is where sitting meditation is happening. In the culture where our particular lineage comes from, that's not the case. It's the case that some people are really into that and want to become monks. Like there's very few people in Japan who are sitting meditation on a regular basis. Basically, if you start to do that, someone says, well, you're gonna get ordained? What are you doing? It's like that's what the job is. And mostly your job then, if you become ordained or are the son of a temple priest, that your job becomes to make the ritual space to help people meet the threshold of death. So a place where everything breaks down and your facing of impermanence as a living being is unquestionably encountered. And so the vast majority of all work of monks in Japan is doing ritual work for funerals. And there's a very elaborate and beautiful culture and custom around that I'm so happy to be a part of. Basically, that was life. It was you practiced meditation in the morning, you ate breakfast, you did some cleaning, and then you looked at the schedule and you saw how many funeral services do we have today. And maybe if you're in a smaller temple and there are fewer families, there'd be less. There'd be more emphasis on practice and maybe some studying and teaching, and mostly Westerners went there. So that's one flavor of what it also, that can be another practice or a way of being Buddhist, is simply relying on those rituals. And I don't know really of any Buddhist traditions off the top of my head that don't emphasize meditation practice if you're also studying the teachings. In my experience, those have really gone hand in hand, although I think you can gain a lot from just studying the teachings and not practicing meditation. But I don't know where that's happening in the US or in the West. And lastly, I'll say, there's a very underripe place of exploration within, I would say, Western Buddhism in particular, about the place of clergy members and non-clergy members and the reciprocal relationship that happens there. So to just show up, to have a place where you can show up that's non-transactional and pour yourself in and offer your resources and not expect anything back is a tremendous spiritual apparatus. It really does so much to have that present. And so this is a little awkward because it sounds like I'm saying, come on, give more, like, bring over some eggs, Bill. Like, but I think there's really so much to that. And I would say in my own path, that's what drew me to Buddhism so firmly, was when I first went to a meditation. I spent a month at Great Vow Zen Monastery, and I showed up there and I said, hey, okay, I'm gonna be here for a month. And at the end they were like, oh, do you have enough money to make a donation? And if you do, we recommend $300. And I was like, really? Like, that's it? You're not gonna watch, like, if I write the check or not? There was just none of that. And now, you know, the way they do that has changed. I think they pretty much say, if you can pay, please do. We really gotta keep the lights on. But you can tell that's their leading heart of how they want to move in the world. And that, I think, it blows open your heart and how you live your own life, because we tend to live by, you know, economy of transaction, not the economy of gift giving. I was thinking about this today. If I go into an Albertsons, particularly a Costco or a Target, I feel hateful and spiteful while I'm in there. That's my karma, but there's something in me that just like hates it. And walking down the detergent aisle, anywho, that's a kind of economy that happens in that space. Walking in the Eugene Saturday market is another kind of economy where I feel this emphasis on giving gifts, where I'd say, like, you know, this is such a beautiful carrot. You know, how much do you want for it? It's like $10. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't today. But it's like more than I'd pay at Albertsons. Great, I'm so happy. Please continue, like, living this way and making these beautiful things. So, bringing that all back to your question, Ray, that there are many ways to be Buddhist, and they don't require practicing meditation. Though I think we have been discovering in the West that sometimes having meditation practice is very helpful for most people. And I would also say it's true if you want to make it a center stone, a cornerstone of your life, finding a teacher to be engaged with is absolutely essential. That lots of wild stuff, lots of kind of knots, lots of creatures in the dark, as Emma has said, are very well lurking there. And to be able to work with those with a teacher is really important when those moments happen. Did that get at your question? I felt like I danced around most of the periphery of it.
No, I think that answered it. Thank you.
Yeah. So that puts us even a little bit after time. Well, I wanted to tell everyone thank you for being here. It's been such a delight. And I also want to say that next Tuesday, I'll sit Zazen in the evening and would love to enjoy. I will make some decaf coffee for myself and whoever else appears. And if other food appears or other drinks that people want to share, we can enjoy that together. We'll say this is a non-alcoholic drink event. So who knows if we'll be drinking things here in the hall on the floor, out on the Ngao if the weather's really nice, upstairs. But if you'd like to come and enjoy each other like that, please do that. We'll finish.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.